Golden wheat fields sway beautifully. A blonde woman watches her father. A young tailor stands among wheat. Her father embraces her warmly. He promises she will rule this land. He explains that owning the fields requires immense responsibility and duty. He instructs her to protect the land and its loyal people. The father vows to protect Taylor at all costs. A sudden, sharp crackle sounds as fire consumes the wheat. A couple gazes at the destruction. They stand amidst the burning remains. Adult Taylor gazes out with her. A soft, quick swish sounds as she closes the curtain. She stands alone in her office. She reviews several maps and letters. Taylor reaches for the family's crest. Melancholy and exhaustion show in her eyes. A sudden, frantic shout calls for her. The maid rushes in, appearing terrified. Taylor questions what has caused the disturbance. The maid frantically reports that Viscount Jackson is currently mistreating Jessie. A flushed Viscount Jackson yells for attention. Jackson demands the servant sit beside him immediately, questioning her hesitation. A wet splash sounds as Jackson pours liquid on the elderly servant, begging for Jessie's release. Jackson mocks the servant for daring to speak without his permission. He commands the servants to obey their master without question. Taylor looks down at the situation. She enters the room, observing the chaos. The servants look at Taylor in surprise. Jackson realizes Taylor is his intended bride. Taylor stands firm and regal. Jackson decides Taylor is worth the expense. Jackson mocks her for finally making an appearance. Taylor turns away from his gaze. Jackson remarks that her arrival is well-timed. He claims the servants were being rude and required discipline. Jackson demands Taylor apologize by pouring him a drink to earn his forgiveness for her staff. Taylor offers to handle the Viscount's complaints personally. She orders the servants to leave the room. They quickly acknowledge Taylor's command and depart. Taylor remains alone with the arrogant Jackson. Jackson approaches Taylor with his work. He repeats his belief that she is worth the price paid. Jackson questions why his family would marry into a house as lowly as Tamer. Taylor is haunted by her memories. Narrator reflections describe House Taylor's former glory as a cornerstone of the empire. Taylor imagines her parents' grief at seeing their legacy treated with such disrespect. She visits her parents' cold tomb. Taylor laments how her family name has fallen to such a state. A girl holding a stuffed bear rudely declares Taylor has been replaced and is no longer at home. Taylor's uncle arrogantly seizes control of the estate, throwing papers as Taylor silently appeals to her late parents. Her internal monologue describes a life spent in suffocating, patient silence. A covered portrait of the former Duke and Duchess serves as a somber reminder of what was lost. She reflects on the systematic theft of her family's legacy. The weight of her circumstances continues to force her into a state of quiet endurance. A cherished memory shows her father embracing her, a stark contrast to her current reality. Taylor's sharp green eyes burn with a hidden, icy determination. She whispers a final, private farewell to her former life of passivity. Viscount Jackson treats her with casual disrespect, tugging at her hair as if she were a mere possession while questioning her silence. Taylor's gaze hardens as she questions who truly holds the value in their arrangement. She openly insults Jackson's character, unimpressed by his royal connections and wondering how great of a scoundrel he must be. Taylor questions why his family would pay off her massive debt and waive the dowry, sensing a hidden motive. Her focus remains locked on the man who thinks he has bought her. A sudden, sharp hiccup sounds as Jackson expresses his startled confusion at her boldness. Taylor looms over the stumbling Viscount, questioning his sanity for assaulting a servant in her home the night before the wedding. Enraged, Jackson raises a hand to strike her for her defiance. Taylor remains perfectly still, meeting his anger with a cold, unyielding stare. Jackson stumbles over a bottle as Taylor decisively pins it to the floor with her boot. A sudden, pained sounds as Jackson is caught off guard by the impact. The Viscount falls to the floor in a daze, clutching his neck in pain. Taylor stands over him with a wine bottle, appearing as a judge delivering a sentence. She tells her parents that she has one final critical thing to add before the ceremony. Jackson cowers on the floor, pleading for mercy as he realizes she intends to hit him with the bottle. A dark shadow falls over Taylor's face as she prepares to strike him down. She reflects on the years spent sharpening her metaphorical blade for this very moment. Taylor watches the pathetic man crawl away, her patience finally exhausted. The narrative confirms that the time has finally come for her to fight back. Her hand grips the neck of the bottle with newfound strength and purpose. Taylor raises the weapon high, her silhouette dominant in the moonlight. She coldly warns the Viscount that he will die if he bites his tongue as he cowers in terror. With a quick, powerful swish sounding, Taylor swings the bottle with everything she has. A rhythmic thud sounds as riders gallop toward the estate in the middle of the night. Two men on horseback arrive at the outskirts of the massive Taylor castle, acknowledging their arrival. The soldier questions what message was powerful enough to bring his leader here so urgently immediately after returning from battle. The dark-haired leader admits his curiosity was piqued by the unexpected message. He examines the wedding invitation, wondering if the blonde duchess is truly getting married. The formal letter requests his noble presence at the upcoming wedding ceremony. Inside the castle, Jackson lies unconscious while Taylor stands over his broken body. Taylor admits that putting her plans into actual practice feels much different than merely imagining them. The Viscount remains slumped on the ground, defeated by his intended bride. Elsewhere, Rosette prepares for the day, addressing Lady Cornwall as she admires her own reflection. Rosette Taylor, formerly Rosette Ronan, presents herself in a lavish purple dress while asking for an opinion on her appearance. Lady Cornwall and Emma Taylor flatter the girl, celebrating their successful climb into the Taylor family. Rosette mocks Taylor's wedding, viewing it as a transaction to rid themselves of her by selling her to House Jackson. Emma gleefully anticipates the debt forgiveness that Taylor's marriage to Jack Jackson will bring them. The man smiles smugly, pleased with the success of their cruel social climbing scheme. They gaze out at the castle, plotting for the day it will be entirely under their control once the real Taylor is gone. Taylor sits alone in her bridal gown, looking over a document with a somber expression. Her bridal beauty is overshadowed by the exhaustion and resolve in her green eyes. The maids arrive to place the wedding veil, and Taylor calmly prepares to face the day. The brown-haired maid questions why a bride would work until the ceremony, but Taylor insists on helping her staff until the end. A voice wonders if she will be all right as an announcement heralds the arrival of the Duchess and Lady Rosette. Emma and Rosette enter the room with smug expressions, displaying their newfound wealth and status. A sudden, soft rustle sounds as Taylor stands in her wedding gown, accepting a bow from her loyal maid. Emma claims that because she raised the girl, she felt it was only proper to give her some final advice. A quick, sharp snap sounds as Emma closes her fan, addressing Taylor by name with a chilling coldness. The dark-haired Duchess leans in to cruelly advise Taylor to endure any abuse or infidelity her new husband might bring home. Emma warns her never to seek help from them, mockingly noting that Taylor has always been talented at suffering in silence. A rhythmic, light tap sounds as Emma strikes Taylor's shoulder with her fan, dismissively telling her to live well in her new life. Taylor stands enveloped in a shimmering light, her eyes closed as she prepares to step into the role forced upon her. Emma's final parting words command Taylor to smile like an idiot and never return to the estate, even in death. Rosette looks back with a mocking smirk while Emma leads the way, satisfied with their plan to discard the real heir. A sudden, sharp shout sounds as Taylor stands before her maids, declaring that this castle is still their true home. The servants are overcome with emotion, covering their faces as they weep for the fate of their mistress. Taylor looks at her crying maid with a steady gaze, her green eyes filled with a secret, burning resolve. She reminds herself to keep her emotions under control, knowing that the success of her plan depends on her composure. Taylor stands alone in her magnificent bridal gown, appearing every bit the regal duchess her father intended her to be. Her focus remains sharp and unyielding. The grand wedding hall stands ready. Jack Jackson waits at the altar, his face heavily bruised and swollen from the beating Taylor delivered the night before. Rosette watches from the pews, mockingly pitying Taylor for having to marry such a disheveled scoundrel. The Countess Jackson is horrified by the state of her son's face, lamenting the loss of his handsome appearance. Jack's head throbbed with a dull ache as he realizes he has no memory of the events from the previous night. The dark-haired guest watches the proceedings with an intense, calculated curiosity, while his companion makes a snide remark. A soft, quick swish sounds as the veil sells. Taylor walks down the aisle, clutching a bouquet of white roses as she approaches her trembling groom. Guests whisper about how pitiful the bride looks, unaware of the trap she has carefully laid for the Jackson family. Jack stares at Taylor with wide-eyed shock as Joseph mocks his inability to close his mouth in the presence of such beauty. Even the Archbishop is momentarily stunned by the situation, watching the bruised groom and the radiant bride. The dark-haired man reflects on the invitation he received, recalling the cryptic message Taylor sent to ensure his presence. The letter promised to reveal the sharpest blade to protect his secret in exchange for his attendance. Taylor's written vow claimed she had prepared the most useful weapon for the hunt he was currently engaged in. The guest observes Taylor, noting that she looks fragile enough to break at any moment despite her regal bearing. The Archbishop begins the ceremony, asking Jack Jackson if he swears to take Taylor as his wife and cherish her forever. Jack manages a twisted, smug smile despite his injuries, believing he has finally won his prize. Taylor remains perfectly still, her expression cold and unreadable as she prepares to deliver her final blow. A blurred reflection in the window serves as a ghostly reminder of the woman she used to be. She recalls Rosette's taunts about smiling like an idiot, using the memory to fuel her icy determination. A sudden, sharp twang sounds in her memory as her father once praised her for possessing a powerful weapon. She remembers the vital lesson that when hunting prey larger than oneself, one must never appear stronger than the opponent. Taylor imagines herself as the hunter, drawing back the bowstring as she prepares to release the arrow. The bride and groom stand face to face, the tension in the room reaching a breaking point. Taylor leans in to whisper a single, devastating truth to Jack that shatters his confidence instantly. Jack is visibly terrified, his eyes bulging in shock at the revelation Taylor has just shared with him. A system notification mockingly observes that there is no longer a single hair left on the groom's head. The dark-haired guest smiles thinly, realizing that the hunt has finally begun in earnest. Count Jackson erupts in a sudden fit of rage, shouting that he will not allow the marriage to proceed. He insults Taylor's character, calling her a vulgar woman and demanding that the ceremony be stopped immediately. The Countess drags a dazed Jack away, announcing that the debt is forgiven and the wedding is officially canceled. Taylor's uncle and aunt are left in a state of frantic panic, screaming for someone to block the Jacksons' carriage as their plans crumble. Frantic voices echo through the halls, desperately searching for the missing Grace. A man shouts her name with a face contorted by intense fury. He threatens her with permanent expulsion from the Taylor family if she does not return to beg for forgiveness. The decree of her banishment rings out with a cold and final authority. Taylor listens to the distant shouting with a calm, unbothered expression. She walks down the corridor as the dark-haired leader watches her from behind. A sudden soft gulp sounds as she steels herself for the path ahead. The two pass each other in silence, their fates momentarily intertwining in the narrow hallway. Her magnificent bridal gown brushes against the floor as she maintains her regal pace. The dark-haired man stands alone, surrounded by the scent of blue roses. A soldier informs his leader that Duke Taylor is currently making a scene outside the chapel. The leader reflects on her promise to place a weapon directly into his hands. His companion is confused by the mention of blades, unaware that Taylor refers to herself. He realizes she has offered her own life as a shield to protect his darkest secret. A rhythmic, light tap sounds as her lace-covered heels strikes the stone step. Taylor navigates the shadowy passages of the castle with a gaze filled with secret resolve. She encounters Lady Cornwall waiting in a dark stairwell with a glowing lantern. The older woman watches her approach with a solemn and knowing expression. Taylor acknowledges Lady Cornwall as she prepares for the next phase of her escape. A sudden, firm grasp sounds as the elder woman takes her hand to guide her safely. They arrive at a heavy, barred door tucked away in a quiet corner of the estate. A rhythmic, light thud sounds as Taylor stops to look back at her mentor. Lady Cornwall bows low, confirming that all preparations for her departure are complete. The elder woman solemnly declares that the moment they have long awaited has finally arrived. Taylor acknowledges the weight of the situation, ready to leave her old life behind. She reflects on a shared secret and a promise that has been kept for 13 long years. She remembers a time when she was a helpless child pleading for the woman's assistance. The memory of her younger self serves as a reminder of the pain that fueled her determination. Lady Cornwell helps her into a traveling cloak and provides the location of her contact at the Maxwell Inn. Taylor steps toward the light of the exit, leaving the shadows of her past behind. Clad in her dark mantle, she prepares to take control of her own destiny. The heavy creak of a carriage wheel marks the beginning of her journey away from the castle. Inside the moving carriage, she reflects on the events that transpired earlier that morning. Her thoughts return to the mysterious man she encountered in the corridor. She recalls how he watched her walk away from the altar with an unreadable expression. Although no words were spoken, the tension between them felt like a physical weight. She recognized him instantly, despite the silence and the chaos of the wedding day. He appeared as a dominant force that rendered the magnificent Taylor estate a mere background. Taylor views him as a powerful predator, the exact weapon she needs for her ultimate revenge. She holds a piece of black lace, mentally tethering her future to his overwhelming strength. The narrative confirms that he is the one man she absolutely requires to succeed. The scene shifts to the exterior of the Maxwell Inn as the sun shines brightly over the garden. A sudden, sharp creak sounds as the dark-haired man exits the building with his subordinate. A sudden, soft gasp sounds as the soldier notes how the once-packed inn has become completely empty. He questions whether the establishment has suddenly ceased its business operations. A sudden, soft tsk sounds as the dark-haired man smirks, realizing the vacancy was planned. A rhythmic, dull thud sounds as someone descends the stairs from the floor above. The leader stops and looks up, sensing that his visitor has finally arrived. A sudden, soft tsk sounds as he notes the audacity of someone entering his room without permission. A sudden, quick click sounds as he reaches for the doorknob to confront the intruder. Blonde Taylor sits by the window as the dark-haired man observes her from behind. He watches her with a piercing, purple gaze. Taylor looks away, lost in a somber memory. Her expression is filled with a quiet, lingering sadness. She clenches her hands tightly in her lap. A solitary lantern illuminates the quiet, moonlit chamber. She unfolds a piece of black cloth bearing a fierce tiger crest. Taylor stands tall, clutching the crest as she prepares for what comes next. She closes her eyes, steeling her resolve for the journey ahead. A rhythmic, light clatter sounds as a carriage travels through the dark woods at night. Taylor recalls the horrific carriage accident that claimed the lives of Duke and Duchess Richmond and the Crown Prince. Inside the carriage, Luciana asks Arthur if the victim was truly the prince. Arthur mentions the Duke's precautions while Luciana worries about the identity of the recovered body. The narrative notes that the young Duke and the Crown Prince shared a striking resemblance. Luciana laments the tragic nature of the situation. A sudden, soft gasp sounds as Grace awakens to her mother's touch. Arthur checks if she is awake while Grace asks if something is wrong. Luciana gently cups her face and explains that she was the one who woke her up. She softly tells Grace to go back to sleep. A low, sharp rumble sounds as the couple reflects on the premature nature of the funeral. A sudden, sharp neigh sounds as the horse rears up and the carriage jerks violently to a halt. Arthur frantically asks if Luciana and Grace are unharmed, and Luciana confirms they are fine before asking about him. Luciana hugs her daughter tightly and commands her to stay put, promising to return soon. A sudden, sharp gasp sounds as Arthur steps outside and demands to know why the carriage was stopped. He is stunned to find the Crown Prince's knight standing before him in the darkness. The bloodied knight desperately tells him to run. A sudden, firm shout sounds as Arthur catches the collapsing man and tells him to listen. The knight warns that he must flee because the invisible ones are closing in. He shoves the crested cloth into Arthur's hand, begging him to take it. The knight reveals that the person is under the protection of the Dowager Duchess of Richmond. A heavy, dull thud sounds as Arthur grips the cloth while the knight collapses. Arthur hands the crest to Grace and tells her to take it and return to Taylor Castle. Grace cries as she asks what will happen to her parents if she leaves. Luciana assures her that they will follow right behind and tells her not to worry. Arthur begs his companion to take good care of Grace. Grace is carried away as she looks back at her parents one last time. The knight vows to protect her, but Grace internally screams in denial. Tears stream down her face as the knight repeats his promise to keep her safe. She watches in horror as her parents disappear into the dark forest. A sudden, sharp scream sounds as a violent fire erupts, consuming the scene of the crash. At the funeral, someone calls out to her Grace and my lady amidst the chaos. Grace stands in mournful silence while a woman weeps beside her. Guests whisper about how the Taylor carriage was completely incinerated alongside the others. A man wonders in shock what on earth is happening to the great families. Grace stands alone before a grand tomb, her childhood lost in an instant. A shadowy man looms over her. He warns her that if she does not want to end up like her parents, she must obey him. He whispers a command for her to live quietly and hold her breath. A rhythmic, soft rattle sounds as he asks if she understands, while she trembles in fear. Returning to the present, Taylor looks forward with cold, unyielding eyes, ready to strike back. Taylor sits quietly by the window as the dark-haired man stands behind her. A sudden, soft sigh sounds as Taylor gazes downward with a somber expression. The dark-haired man stands with a stoic and imposing presence. A sudden, quick rustle sounds as her hand clenches the piece of black fabric. The dark-haired man notes that she was aware of his presence at the inn. Taylor bows her head slightly, offering a sincere apology for her previous behavior. A sudden, rhythmic scrape sounds as a hand prepares to take a seat. He questions if she truly believes herself to be a sharp weapon. The man sits down and looks at a document with a piercing gaze. Taylor stands tall in her dark traveling cloak, her blonde hair catching the light. She explains her decision to seek him out personally at this location. A sudden, soft gulp sounds as she prepares to reveal a secret. Taylor directly addresses him as the Crown Prince, catching him off guard. A sudden, sharp gasp sounds as the man reacts with visible shock to her words. He demands to know her true intentions and questions her incredible boldness. A sudden, heavy thud sounds as he approaches her with a confrontational intensity. Taylor presents the crested cloth to him with an unwavering gaze. The fabric displays a detailed and fierce tiger crest in dark thread. The man looks down at the crest with a complex and pensive expression. He holds the small piece of cloth as he remains lost in God. The narrative notes her journey toward the capital following the news of the prince's death. Taylor recounts the tragic moment her family encountered a dying knight. She recalls the knight's final, desperate message delivered to her parents. He revealed that the true heir remains under the protection of the Dowager Duchess of Richmond. The dark-haired man clutches the crested cloth tightly against his chest. Taylor somberly reflects on how her parents returned only as black ashes after that day. She addresses him with deep respect as she concludes her story. She implores him to use her as a tool to achieve his own vengeance. Taylor pledges her service until he is restored to his rightful throne. She solemnly swears to be the sword he needs to strike back. Taylor looks at him with eyes filled with a new and cold determination. The man listens in silence, his arms crossed as he considers her offer. Her green eyes flash with the intensity of her hidden resolve. The narrative describes the quietly burning rage that fuels her every move. A memory shows Taylor in her bridal gown amidst a sea of consuming flames. She is described as a general leading a charge directly toward the enemy. Taylor waits for his judgment, her hand resting on her hair. The man remains silent, deeply contemplating the risks of her proposal. A sudden soft rustle sounds as Taylor prepares to make her final request. Taylor smiles and boldly asks for his affection in return for her service. She formally requests that he make her his official lover. Taylor further demands that he take her with him to Richmond. The man asks if she is truly requesting to become the hidden lover she mentioned. He questions why she does not simply ask for marriage instead of such a title. Taylor rejects the idea of marriage as a burden, seeking only a reason to stay by his side. She reminds him that he requires the support of Richmond and Taylor to succeed. She tells him to take her, as she represents the only true bloodline of the Taylor family. The man remarks on the startling ease with which she makes such cold demands. He points out that her house is currently under the control of the Ronins. He recalls how she was sold into debt and questions her decision to flee her fate. Taylor explains that a blade's power exceeds its visibility. She claims she has prepared for this exact moment. The dark-haired man and Taylor share an intense look. A hand reaches out with slow, deliberate intent. He firmly tilts her head up by the chin. The man demands total commitment and rejects any pretenses. He mocks her for trembling at such a slight touch. He questions if this is truly the resolve of a weapon. His hand slides down to her neck as he probes her. Taylor recalls her internal vow while witnessing her family's ruin. She remembers the burning fields and her parents' graves. A memory shows young Taylor being threatened to live silently. She remembers her self-resentment and the tears she shed. The dark-haired man pulls Taylor into a sudden, deep kiss. He keeps his eyes open, observing her during the embrace. They break the kiss as their lips part slightly. He pulls back, staring at her with intensity. Taylor asks if His Highness possesses enough resolve himself. She questions if he is truly prepared for the journey. The man concedes that she has made a valid point. Taylor is depicted as a holy blade ready for war. He studies her with a focused and calculating gaze. The man accepts her offer and asks for her plan. He asks how she intends to reclaim her family's legacy. Taylor dismisses his concerns as if they are trivial matters. A hand reaches for the hilt of a gleaming sword. The man stands tall, vowing to annihilate his foes. A scene of blue roses is marred by static lines. Angry demands for immediate debt repayment echo at the castle. An older man rages against the Jackson family's audacity. He stands over a weeping woman in a purple gown. He demands she surrender her jewelry to pay their debts. He rages over the fact that Grace is missing. The woman suggests selling the estate to save themselves. A sudden, sharp thud sounds as he strikes out. He explains that law prevents the private sale of estates. Lady Cornwall arrives, apologizing for her delay with the documents. The man orders her to find Grace and bring her back. Lady Cornwall suggests that Grace's absence is actually an opportunity. The couple stares at her in stunned, expectant silence. A memory recalls the Empress's maternal home and wedding scandal. The narrative warns of the Empress's inevitable and terrible fury. A sudden, sharp gasp sounds as the couple realizes the danger. The woman in purple asks for a solution to their plight. Lady Cornwall takes her hand with a cold, knowing look. She proposes casting Grace out of the family for good. She argues this will shield House Taylor from the scandal. A blonde girl is shown being rejected by dark figures. Lady Cornwall promises that the duchy will belong to him. The couple rejoices as they hand over the task to her. A gray-haired woman formally accepts an order from her superior. Sunlight filters through the lush green leaves of a forest on a bright day. A sudden, rhythmic rattle sounds as a carriage travels down a path toward a distant castle. Inside the carriage, Jack Jackson sits in deep distress, covering his face with a gloved hand. He reflects on his cold conviction that he cannot bring himself to love Taylor. Narrative bubbles describe her as a sheltered lady who surprisingly kept a hidden lover. Jack Jackson grits his teeth in fury as he stares at his own trembling hand. He vows to track them down and tear Taylor's lover to shreds. Taylor is depicted standing amidst blue roses, looking fearful and trapped by thorns. A sudden, soft slurp sounds as Jack Jackson smirks and licks his thumb, anticipating Taylor's tears. He leans out of the window and remarks on the loveliness of Grace Taylor's name. The scene shifts to the exterior of Maxwell's Inn on a sunny afternoon. A knight with reddish-brown hair waits by a staircase, wondering what is being discussed upstairs. He warns a hidden figure that they will strain their neck from their awkward position. A sudden, sharp click sounds as the knight draws his sword and spins around to face an intruder. A sudden, quick swish sounds as the knight holds his blade to the throat of a brown-haired woman. The knight expresses surprise at discovering the person he cornered is a woman. He demands that she identify herself immediately. A sudden, heavy thud sounds as the woman stares back with silent, unyielding defiance. She boldly challenges the knight to go ahead and stab her. A sudden, soft squeak sounds as she mocks the knight's ignorance while he stammers in confusion. Taylor appears at the top of the stairs and identifies the woman as Jessie. The dark-haired man notes that Taylor made a successful escape from her family's castle. Taylor introduces Jessie as a companion who will be assisting them from now on. Jessie introduces herself as Taylor's maid and the person who taught her courage. A sudden, soft ding sounds as the knight reflects on the meaning of courage, while Jessie's spirited image lingers. The dark-haired man introduces the knight as his trusted aide. A sudden, metallic clack sounds as the knight sheathes his sword. Taylor offers a polite greeting to the knight, addressing him as Sir Joseph Lexton. She formally asks him to take good care of them during their journey. A sudden, soft pop sounds as Joseph reacts with visible shock to this sudden turn of events. The dark-haired man announces that Taylor will be coming to Richmond as his lover. He stands with his arms crossed, exuding an air of unshakable authority. A sudden, sharp gasp sounds as Joseph demands an explanation, but the man orders him to move the carriage. Joseph continues to plead for clarity while Taylor remains calm and composed. Taylor stands tall in her dark traveling cloak, ready to depart. A sudden, soft blush sounds as Joseph is overwhelmed by Taylor's perceived kindness. A sudden, loud shout sounds as he enthusiastically claims that being a coachman has always been his dream. A sudden, quiet tsk sounds as Jessie looks at the knight with a skeptical expression. A sudden, soft puff sounds as the dark-haired man smirks while leading the way out. A sudden, rhythmic rattle sounds as the carriage departs under a clear blue sky. The dark-haired man rides alongside the carriage on a black horse. Taylor asks if his wrist is all right, and he admits it still aches from their earlier encounter. A sudden, soft ding sounds as he critiques Taylor's use of a wine bottle as a weapon. A sudden, cold shiver sounds as Joseph recalls the bruises on Jack Jackson's face with a sense of dread. A sudden, soft chuckle sounds as the man acknowledges that the injury was Taylor's handiwork. A sudden, quick swish sounds as Jessie demonstrates the proper way to swing an arm for a strike. Taylor declares that next time she will finish the job with more than just a bottle. A sudden, soft sigh sounds as Jessie watches her lady with a mixture of concern and loyalty. A sudden, quick tap sounds as Jessie takes Taylor's hand and notes that this is only the beginning. Jessie looks down in quiet contemplation as the journey begins. Taylor stares ahead with a look of unwavering focus. A sudden, rhythmic rattle sounds as the carriage speeds through the dense forest. Taylor turns to address Jessie as they travel toward their new destiny. Taylor offers a reassuring gaze while telling her companion not to worry. She declares this to be the initial step in reclaiming her stolen land. Taylor offers a gentle smile, promising she will not yield to exhaustion. Jessie looks at her lady with a mixture of pride and affection. A sudden, soft ding sounds as the two women firmly clasp hands in solidarity. Taylor commands Jessie to ensure everyone knows she has finally made her move. Jessie bows her head and confirms she has understood the mission perfectly. A sudden, loud bang sounds as the carriage door is thrown wide open. A sudden, heavy thud sounds as Jessie leaps from the moving vehicle, shocking Joseph. Joseph stares in utter disbelief as a woman jumps from the speeding carriage. The dark-haired man reflects on Taylor's vow to transform into a sharp blade. Taylor sits in solitude, closing her eyes as she prepares for what's next. A sudden, quiet huff sounds as the dark-haired man reacts to the arrival. Joseph and the dark-haired man finally arrive at the military encampment. The man looks toward the camp with a cold and calculating expression. He observes that his soldiers have prepared a welcoming ceremony for his return. The knights stand at attention, announcing the formal return of their master. The dark-haired man dismounts his black horse as he is greeted by his men. Joseph offers his hand to Taylor as she gracefully exits the carriage. The knights whisper among themselves, questioning the identity of the blonde newcomer. The dark-haired man takes Taylor's hand, leaving his soldiers in stunned silence. A knight watches the interaction with a look of silent suspicion. The soldiers gossiped, labeling Taylor as a pampered lady and a potential burden. Taylor maintains a calm and stoic expression despite the hostile whispers. The narrative introduces the Richmond Knights as a grand and formidable force. A map outlines the camp's strategic defense of spearmen, swordsmen, and archers. The knights are described as elite soldiers who never relax their guard. They are the Empire's finest, having survived the brutal Wall of Death. The dark-haired man keeps a watchful eye on Taylor as she observes the camp. Taylor sits alone on a bench, absorbing the atmosphere of the military site. Joseph suggests that Taylor return to the carriage to avoid the intimidating soldiers. He continues to warn her that the fierce environment might be too much. The dark-haired man tells Joseph to stop, respecting Taylor's choice to stay. Joseph looks back at his master, still concerned for the lady's well-being. The man notes that Taylor's interest in the knights is purely strategic. Taylor is depicted as a master chess player, calculating her next decisive move. A sudden soft rustle sounds as a brown-haired knight approaches Taylor's bench. He introduces himself with a polite bow as Sir Andrew Isaac. Taylor looks up at the young knight with an expression of mild curiosity. Andrew Isaac is identified as the youngest of the prominent Isaac brothers. Taylor offers a radiant smile and tells Andrew it is a pleasure to meet him. Andrew blushes intensely, completely captivated by Taylor's sudden and warm greeting. He offers Taylor a pouch of food, which she accepts with genuine gratitude. Taylor apologizes for a knight of his caliber having to serve as a coachman. A sudden, soft pop sounds as Andrew is overwhelmed by her high praise. Andrew enthusiastically shouts that driving the carriage has been a joyful experience. The soldiers mock Andrew's newfound enthusiasm for carriage driving. His grace silences Joseph's laughter by revealing his own secret childhood dream. Two knights observe the camp, noting how the newcomer is disrupting their usual discipline. Suspicion grows among the ranks regarding Taylor's role as the Duke's mother. A massive shadow looms over the camp as night falls. Monstrous winged creatures descend from the darkening sky. A sudden, sharp gasp sounds as Taylor is jolted by a deafening roar. A young knight grips his weapon, facing his first encounter with real monsters. His grace instructs Taylor to follow Andrew and hide her identity. He offers a brief reassurance that the skirmish will be over soon. A sudden metallic clack sounds as Andrew leads Taylor away while his master strikes. The Duke shouts for everyone to move as he engages the enemy. He focuses his energy, readying a devastating blow. Taylor watches in awe as the Duke displays the lethal power of a survivor. She finds the raw strength of the veteran knights completely overwhelming. Her thoughts linger on the most impressive presence among men. Taylor compares the Duke's ferocious fighting style to that of a war god. An ancient illustration depicts the legendary figure of a god of war. A sudden, loud whoosh sounds as a gust of wind catches Taylor off guard. She reaches up, realizing her protective hood has slipped. A winged beast lurks in the shadows just above the path. Taylor turns back with a look of pure terror. The monster snatches Taylor from the ground and takes to the sky. Andrew cries out in horror as he watches his charge being taken. The young knight leaps into the air, commanding the beast to release her. A sudden, bright flash sounds as his blade severs the creature's ling. Andrew reaches out desperately, grabbing Taylor as they plummet together. The two fall through the night sky, far away from the campsite. A sudden, soft thud sounds as Andrew pulls Taylor into a protective embrace. He breathes a sigh of relief, thankful that he caught her. A sudden, quiet huff sounds as Andrew loses consciousness from the shock. Back at camp, the Duke realizes they have disappeared over the cliff. Desperate shouts for the missing pair echo through the forest. The knights continue their search as the scene shifts to the dark ravine. The Duke stands at the edge of the precipice, searching the darkness below. He orders his men to prepare a rope for his immediate descent. Taylor regains consciousness and immediately begins searching for her protector. She realizes with horror that Andrew took the full force of the fall. Tears well in her eyes as she pleads for the young knight to wake. A sudden soft thud sounds as she finds a heartbeat and sighs in relief. A sudden sharp snap sounds as something moves in the nearby brush. Taylor looks up, her face pale with renewed fear. A sudden low growl sounds as a massive wolf with glowing eyes emerges. The Duke shouts for Taylor to stay back as he slides down the rope. Taylor stares at the approaching predator, paralyzed by the sight. A sudden soft rustle sounds as she realizes her hood has fallen away. Despite her fear, Taylor stands her ground to protect the unconscious Andrew. She realizes that retreating would mean leaving the young knight to his death. Determination hardens her expression as she refuses to move an inch. The Duke watches from above, amazed by her reckless bravery. Taylor resolves to protect Sir Andrew. She notices a bow and arrows. A sudden sharp tap sounds as she wends. Taylor draws back a powerful bow. She waits for the predator's approach. Taylor readies her shot with focus. She releases the arrow with determination. Taylor realizes her physical strength is insufficient. The beast lunges as her grip hails. An omen of death fills me there. A sudden soft rustle sounds as a hand appears. A sudden quick swish sounds as he acts. Taylor looks up in complete surprise. The dark-haired Duke stands behind her. He helps her aim the final shot. A sudden sharp twang sounds as he fires. A sudden quick swish sounds off his lies. The predator lies dead on the ground. A sudden soft sigh sounds as she exhales. A sudden soft rustle sounds as he touches her. A sudden soft jolt sounds as she flinches. The Duke notes her clothing took the damage. He checks if Taylor is physically unharmed. Taylor offers a small, quiet vocal response. Sirius shouts for his brother awake. Taylor asks Sirius to be more gentle. Sirius grumbles about his brother's constant needs. A sudden, quiet bow sounds as he thanks her. Taylor offers a warm and gentle smile. Sirius suggests they return to the top. The Duke watches Taylor with a calculating gaze. He points out her many visible injuries. He asks if she can manage quieting. A sudden, soft rustle sounds as she looks up. The Duke maintains a neutral, observant expression. He asks what she is currently doing. He questions her lack of pretense now. He suspects she has long planned this. He notes her unusual level of composure. A sudden, soft rustle sounds as he missed her. He looks down at her with scrutiny. Taylor expresses her gratitude for his help. A sudden, firm squeeze sounds as he grips her. A shout of failure echoes within Richmond Castle. Henry rages over the failed assassination plot. His companion urges him to keep calm. Henry insists on the Duke's eventual demise. Narration details the Duke's harsh military past. He is described as lacking noble refinement. Henry claims total control over the castle staff. The purple-haired woman declares that Walter Richmond will never control the castle, intending to leave him rotting in the annex just like his stepmother. A woman in a black gown stands alone in a dimly lit, blue-hued chamber. A servant addresses the woman as the Dowager Duchess. Narration reveals that the Duke is finally returning home after a decade-long absence. The servant asks the Dowager Duchess if she wishes to greet the Duke upon his arrival. The silver-haired woman dismisses the offer, claiming she is feeling tired. She instructs the servant to let her sleep and not to wake her for any reason. Lying in bed, she laments that nothing in her life holds any meaning anymore. She reflects on the loss of her family, her honor, and everything she once held dear. The sun begins to set, casting a vibrant orange glow across the horizon. A grand military camp is established in the valley as evening approaches. A sudden, firm step sounds as someone walks across the dirt. The dark-haired Duke stands on a ledge, looking down at the massive castle in the distance. He observes that they have finally reached Richmond, while Taylor stands quietly behind him. Taylor gazes at the distant fortress with a calm and contemplative expression. The Duke turns his gaze back toward his companion. He notes that Taylor seems to have been released from her personal guard, which leaves her confused. He points to the camp behind them, where a large group of knights has gathered to offer Taylor various gifts and flowers. The Duke identifies the men as the elite Richmond's knights, while Taylor offers them a cheerful wave. Taylor reminds him of her earlier promise that she would win the hearts of his men. The Duke is stunned that she achieved in days what took him 10 years of bloody warfare to earn. He looks away with narrowed eyes, seemingly processing her incredible social influence. Narration suggests her efforts are the result of long-term self-improvement intended to make her his perfect weapon. Taylor is depicted in a regal, dark gown, standing amidst a sea of white flowers. A voice asks if the Duke is feeling afraid of what is to come. The two figures are seen as small silhouettes standing on a high stone bridge overlooking a deep ravine. Taylor asks if he is afraid, and the Duke confidently replies that he is not. Taylor confesses that she has been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. The Duke agrees as a single black feather drifts through the red-stained air. Internal thoughts describe their enemies as packs of jackals. Narration vows to deliver a fitting end to those who hide behind stolen feathers and pretend to be eagles. Taylor requests that the Duke call her Grace from this moment forward. She suggests that he should address her more affectionately. The Duke reflects on whether words of love and affection are suitable for someone consumed by revenge. He stands alone in a dark, blood-red void, his only purpose in life being vengeance. A final thought concludes that Taylor is no different from him in her resolve. The concepts of love and affection are dismissed as irrelevant to their shared mission. He wonders how she can speak of such things with such apparent ease. Taylor looks at him, suggesting that it would be problematic if he finds even a simple name change difficult. She asserts that she has no intention of pursuing their goals with a half-hearted attitude. The Duke observes her closely, his expression unreadable. He moves closer, looking down at Taylor with an intense and focused gaze. He addresses her as Grace and declares that she will ride into Richmond Castle on his horse by his side. He challenges her by asking if she finds this particular request to be difficult. Grace smiles up at him and accepts the challenge, addressing him by his name, Walter. The scene shifts to the imposing stone entrance of the massive Richmond Castle. A sudden, loud blare sounds as a trumpet announces an arrival. The castle is heralded as the primary cornerstone of the entire Deccan Empire. A sudden, rhythmic clip-clop sounds as horses approach, and a herald announces the formal return of the Duke. The Duke rides his black horse through the gates with a stoic and unwavering resolve. Walter and Grace ride toward the castle. Henry and a woman watch the arrival. Grace confirms she recognizes the distant figures. She credits her past for recognizing Bius. Grace notes that thieves are naturally shameless. The spectators watch the pair with displeasure. A sudden, quick swish sounds as Walter gestures. Walter helps Grace down from the horse. They share an intense moment of eye contact. Henry reacts with shock to their proximity. The woman in blue questions the situation. She welcomes the Duke back with forced cheer. Walter gives a cold and brief confirmation. The woman suggests a guest room for Grace. Walter rejects her proposal for Grace's lodging. He designates the chandelier room for Price. A sudden low murmur sounds as retainers gossip. The woman in blue reacts with utter shock. The woman protests his choice as Walter questions her surprise. Walter asserts his absolute authority over the castle. Walter dismisses the crowd and leads Grace away. The Duke takes Grace's hand as they walk. Grace offers a satisfied and gentle smile. Walter remains stoic as they enter the castle. The pair ascends the stairs toward the interior. Henry watches them with deep-seated resentment. Retainers voice their complaints about his behavior. Narration emphasizes Walter's status as the master. Henry dismisses Walter's plan as doomed. He calls for an immediate strategy meeting. Henry leads his companions into the castle. He vows to maintain control over Richmond. A sudden, quiet murmur sounds as onlookers watch. A young pink-haired girl stands alone. The girl gazes at her surroundings curiously. The scene shifts to a luxurious bedroom. Maids bow as they finish their tasks. Walter and Grace stand in the chamber. A sudden sharp tap sounds as Grace relaxes. Walter observes her movement through the room. Grace looks up with a calm expression. A warm fire burns in the fireplace. The bed is prepared with clean linens. Fresh lilies sit in a glass vase. Grace reflects on those who claim the unearned. Walter critiques the quality of her acting. He asks about the duration of her practice. Walter characterizes her behavior as awkward acting. A sudden soft rustle sounds as she touches lilies. Grace claims she has fallen in love. Walter crosses his arms as Grace tends to flowers. Walter asks if the situation is as simple as she suggests, while Grace clarifies that it is not difficult at all. Grace explains that she will address him as Your Grace from now on to maintain appearances in case they are overheard. Grace notes Walter's effective performance, and he credits her for helping him fully immerse himself in the role. Walter observes that they are both equally skilled in their deception. Walter and Grace share a quiet, knowing look. Walter remains stoic and pensive in the dimly lit room. Walter stares intently, concluding that his grandmother must be located in the annex. Grace asks for the location of the annex as they walk through the hallway. The cold and isolated annex stands alone under the dark night sky. An elderly, pale hand rests weakly atop a dark bedsheet. The silver-haired Dowager Duchess lies in bed, her mind filled with memories of her grandchild. Memories resurface of a joyful young Walter promising to return to his grandmother soon. A close-up highlights a detailed, jeweled cross pinned to young Walter's formal attire. The Dowager Duchess suddenly awakens in the dark, desperately searching for Walter. A spectral vision of a young man appears, answering her call with a somber confirmation. The Dowager Duchess is gripped by confusion as she recognizes the Crown Prince wearing Walter's clothes. She reflects on the unsettling realization that Walter and the prince had swapped their distinctive garments. She recoils in horror, realizing the figure before her is not Walter and pleading for his return. A desperate cry for Walter to be returned echoes through the darkness. The Dowager Duchess gasps as she wakes, startled by a sudden, rhythmic tap sounding at the door. Lady Isaac stands composed in the doorway of the blue-tinted bedchamber. The attendant officially announces that the Duke has finally returned home. The Dowager Duchess turns away, showing no interest in the arrival. Lady Isaac adds that the young woman accompanying the Duke has also arrived. The servant explains that the visitor is requesting a formal audience. Grace sits poised in a grand chair, delicately holding a cup of tea. Grace sips her tea and asks Jessie if they were followed on their journey to the annex. Jessie reports seeing only an obvious wanderer, leading Grace to conclude that her enemies do not yet see her as a threat. Grace stares out the window, reflecting on her sudden entry into the hostile Richmond noble society. Henry stands before his associates, confidently predicting that the people of the castle will despise the newcomer. A dark silhouette depicts the common perception of Grace as a fallen noble attempting to seduce the Duke. Henry dismisses her as a commoner pretending to be a noble, a temporary nuisance that requires no attention. Narrative text emphasizes that this complete lack of regard is exactly what Grace intended. Grace slowly lowers her teacup to the table. Grace and Jessie stand together as Lady Isaac enters the room. Grace addresses the attendant, Lady Isaac, with a calm and measured tone. Grace offers a polite smile and expresses her gratitude for the tea. Lady Isaac delivers the message that the Dowager Duchess has refused to meet with her. Grace questions the attendant, asking if she correctly informed the Dowager Duchess that the Duke's guest requested an audience. After Lady Isaac confirms the message was delivered, Grace firmly instructs her to return and try again. Grace specifies that she should be introduced as Grace of House Duke Taylor this time. Grace waits with a confident and serene expression, expecting a different result. Narrated text describes Eliza Richmond as holding the most prestigious noble title in the empire. The Dowager Duchess is shown in her prime, heralded as the true queen of Richmond Castle. A portrait captures the former grace and authority of the silver-haired matriarch. A dark, textured panel notes that her era of power is now a distant memory. An angry shout calls out for Marchioness Linko. Marchioness Linko berates Lady Isaac for the mistreatment of the Dowager Duchess, specifically the loss of staff and supplies. Lady Isaac indifferently asks if the Duchess is cold, prompting the Marchioness to demand she check the freezing annex herself. Lady Isaac dismissively remarks that she is also rationing firewood for the upcoming winter. A message is delivered, requesting the Dowager Duchess to endure for the sake of Richmond. 3 noblewomen are shown in a hallway, one with a fan, Lady Isaac in a black gown, and a third woman in a blue dress. A sudden rhythmic tap sounds as Lady Isaac stands alone in a dim stone room. Lady Isaac looks somber and reflective. The silver-haired Dowager Duchess lies in her bed. A thought bubble expresses sudden shock. The Dowager Duchess reacts with surprise to the mention of Taylor. She asks Lady Isaac if the visitor is blonde. A memory depicts a blonde man and woman. Lady Isaac asks if the Dowager Duchess will meet with the visitor. The Dowager Duchess confirms that Walter brought the visitor. A sudden, quick swish sounds as the Dowager Duchess turns away. Lady Isaac reacts to her mistress's dismissal. The Dowager Duchess addresses Lady Isaac as Arwen, stating that this is enough and telling her to return to her family. A memory depicts 3 men in black cloaks. The Duchess tells Lady Isaac to stop being her lady-in-waiting. Lady Isaac stands alone, looking downcast. The Dowager Duchess remains alone in the large, cold bedroom. A thought bubble conveys a quiet apology. Lady Isaac informs Grace that the Duchess still refuses to meet with her. Lady Isaac tells Grace and Jessie to go back. Grace stands silently, processing the refusal. Grace speaks up to get Lady Isaac's attention. Jessie asks for a new plan since the attempt to meet failed. Grace observes the necessity of the Dowager Duchess's cooperation for their goal. Grace remains thoughtful and poised. Grace instructs Jessie to return to the chandelier room and observe the servants' movements and the castle's atmosphere. Grace stands alone with Lady Isaac. Lady Isaac prepares to clean up a tea tray. Grace asks if she is cleaning it herself. Grace observes the lack of maids and notes that Lady Isaac is the only lady-in-waiting. Lady Isaac insists that the Dowager Duchess asked Grace to leave. Grace notes the garden lawn was hastily mowed and smells of grass. Grace asks why the annex is so cold and without firewood compared to the main castle. Grace questions if the Queen of Richmond should be treated this way. Lady Isaac looks distressed by Grace's words. Lady Isaac repeats the request for Grace to leave and turns away. Grace calls out to Lady Isaac. Grace asks what she felt seeing her mistress treated this way and what she wanted to do about it. Grace asks if she has been waiting for an opportunity. Grace offers an opportunity to restore her mistress to her rightful place. Grace reflects on her own past as a living corpse and notes that the Duke must be the same. Lady Isaac asks about the kind of preparation Grace mentioned. Grace addresses Lady Isaac again with focus. Grace declares that the time has come to return Richmond to its queen. A memory shows the Dowager Duchess in her prime, asking Arwen what she's doing. The younger Duchess tells her to come along. In the present, Lady Isaac looks tearful and moved. Grace watches as Lady Isaac reflects on her words. Grace asks for help to awaken the Dowager Duchess and reclaim Richmond. Grace reflects on the necessity of awakening the Dowager Duchess to fulfill her plans. A sudden, quick swish sounds as Grace extends her hand toward her companion. Grace firmly grasps Lady Isaac's hands, vowing to give her life if it means returning Richmond to its rightful queen. Lady Isaac looks down at their joined hands in stunned silence. Narrative text describes Arwen Isaac as the loyal mistress of House Count Isaac and the person the late Duke trusted most. A portrait displays the former elegance and status of a younger Arwen Isaac. Grace maintains a steady, encouraging grip on Lady Isaac's hands. Grace expresses her sincere desire to collaborate with Lady Isaac from this moment forward. A warm fire crackles steadily in the stone hearth. The scene shifts to a grand study where Henry and Marchioness Linko stand together. Henry orders a background check on the newcomer, specifically targeting the Wall of Death where the Duke was stranded for years. Marchioness Linko reacts with visible shock at the mention of the dangerous Wall of Death. A text bubble questions whether anyone from such a lawless area could truly be considered a noble. Henry expresses his outrage, feeling that the Duke's actions are an insult to those who protected Richmond during his absence. A sudden, low creak sounds as Henry grips a stone eagle, thinking that the Duke has forgotten he does not own the castle alone. A sudden, quick swish sounds as Henry decides he must personally remind the Duke of his place. Marchioness Linko thinks about how she will also take the opportunity to rattle the Duke. Henry and the Marchioness exchange a conspiratorial look, solidifying their alliance against the Duke. Flora Lewin, the pink-haired daughter of the Count, is formally introduced as she sits amongst flowers. Flora recalls the many noblemen who have persistently invited her to tea. Flora reflects on how Walter stood out as being completely different from the other men she knew. Walter is depicted in his prime, walking with authority in an ornate dark military coat. A close-up highlights Walter's stoic expression and striking features. Flora imagines that she and Walter would have looked like the most perfect pair if he had chosen her. A romanticized vision shows Walter and Grace holding hands, causing Flora distress. Flora recoils in sudden shock, her face turning pale as she snaps out of her daydream. Flora remains speechless and troubled, her cheeks flushed with intense emotion. 2 maids enter the room, calling out to Lady Flora to get her attention. The maids eagerly ask Flora if she has heard the scandalous rumors circulating about the Duke's guest. Flora masks her inner turmoil with a bright, cheerful smile for her servants. Narrative panels detail that the woman has a lowly background and that Marquis Linko is searching the Wall of Death to expose her. Flora gasps in feigned horror, questioning if the woman truly came from a place of criminals and monsters. The maids gossip about how the woman only has a single maid and is staying in the chandelier room. Flora looks deeply sympathetic and teary-eyed as she listens to the reports. Flora feigns worry for the late Duchess while dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The maids are moved by her kindness, praising Flora as a true angel for her compassion. Flora continues her performance, wiping away a false tear with a somber expression. Flora hands gold coins to the maids, asking them to bring her any further information they discover. The maids are delighted by the generous payment and thank their mistress profusely. A sudden, sharp tap sounds as the maids promise to conduct a thorough investigation. Flora watches the maids leave, sitting alone in her bright, flower-filled room. Flora's expression turns cold and focused as she stares at a vase of white roses. A sudden, quick snip sounds as Flora reaches for her gardening shears. Flora concludes that only someone with a reputation as prestigious as hers belongs at the Duke's side. Flora hums a dark tune, thinking that the other woman shouldn't get too comfortable in the castle. The scene shifts to the opulent, high-ceilinged office of the Duke. Walter sits at his desk, focused on writing letters by the light of a large window. Walter reviews a document while his attendant stands nearby with a concerned expression. The attendant addresses the Duke, questioning why he isn't moving immediately to strike while their enemies are unprepared. Walter remains calm, asking if the attendant lacks confidence in him should their opponents prepare a response. Walter notices Joseph's hesitation and asks what is wrong. Joseph reports that Count Lewin barred vassal families from entering. The head of House Rodeo demands entry. Count Lewin mocks the knight's disheveled state. A sudden, quick clang sounds as an insult is delivered. The knights are mocked for their appearance. He reflects on battlefield scars being useless. Marchioness Linko dismisses their attempts at entry. She tells them to wait elsewhere. She demands they show proper gate loyalty. A sudden, loud laugh sounds as she mocks them. She calls them nothing but unwelcome guests. Walter reflects on the harsh, hidden truth. He intended to purge the house immediately. He planned to remove everyone without exception. Grace warns Walter against using violent force. She insists Richmond must avoid being bloodstained. Grace explains power requires a clean foundation. She warns that blood will ruin credibility. Walter contrasts her idealism with current plunderers. She advises handling things with procedural elegance. Walter acknowledges her talent for simple explanations. He admits the path forward is difficult. Grace maintains this is the right way. Walter continues his paperwork in the present. He remains stoic and focused on letters. Walter addresses Joseph to get his attention. He asks Joseph to be patient longer. Walter reflects on gaining loyal companions instead. He concludes he can wait more days. Joseph accepts the order and provides ladders. Joseph announces Marchioness Linko's request for an audience. Walter prepares to receive his unwanted bests. A cascade of pink hair approaches. Marchioness Linko enters with pink-haired Flora Lewin. Flora Lewin stands poised and smiling. A sudden, quick tap sounds as guests arrive. Walter looks up with a weary expression. A sudden, low creak sounds as doors open. The women enter the grand study together. A fresh cup of tea is served. The Marquise welcomes Walter back to Richmond. She introduces Flora as a loyal daughter figure. Flora is presented as a cherished child. She praises Flora's noble and beautiful nature. Walter drinks tea while hearing Flora's refinements. Flora acts bashful during the high praise. A sudden, sharp tap sounds as tea finishes. Walter bluntly asks for their specific business. The Marquise insists on having a proper conversation. Walter's blue eye narrows dangerously. Marchioness Linko mentions the rumors surrounding the Duke's guest. A question arises about Grace's identity. Walter listens with stony silence. Walter declares that Grace is his lover. The Marchioness and Flora are shocked by Grace's lack of status. They mock Grace for being a lowly commoner. Marchioness Linko argues against Grace staying in the chandelier room. She explains the room is reserved for respected mistresses. She insists only vetted nobles may reside here. The Marchioness emphasizes the room's significant status. Walter addresses her with a cold tone. A startled gasp sounds as Marchioness Linko flinches. Walter asks her to state his name. The Marchioness falters in confusion. Walter demands an answer with a threatening gaze. An overwhelming pressure fills the room. Marchioness Linko feels a majestic aura. She senses a majestic royal aura. She desperately denies the possibility of his royalty. She recalls the tragic fire involving the prince. She convinces herself the Duke is bluffing. The Marchioness apologizes but insists Grace is unworthy of the title. She presents Flora as the most suitable woman. She asks the Duke to consider her suggestion. Walter looks at them with absolute indifference. He mocks her words after his exile. Walter notes the glaring embezzlement within the estate records. He realizes they viewed him as a fool. Walter decides to exploit their perception of him. He dismisses the guests to take rest. A sudden, low creak sounds as doors close. Marchioness Linko believes her family still controls Richmond. Flora remains entranced by the Duke's presence. Flora giggles with hidden delight. The Marchioness notes the Duke's attention toward Flora. Flora acts embarrassed but feels confident. She believes the Duke's interest in Grace is temporary. They dismiss Grace as a fake-playing noble. The Marchioness urges Flora to visit the Duke frequently. Flora focuses on her new mission. She vows to work for the Duke's order. Grace appears in the quiet hallway. Grace stands poised and elegant. A sudden, quick whoosh sounds as they pass. The Marchioness gives Flora a final instruction. She warns that Grace will ruin the Duke's reputation. She questions who would respect a Duke with Grace. A sudden, quick swish sounds as Grace moves. Marchioness Linko challenges Grace's ability to act noble. Grace and Marchioness Linko stand in the grand room. Marchioness Linko haughtily demands that Grace bow before her. She orders Grace to leave the castle on her own. The Marchioness declares that Grace doesn't belong in Richmond Castle. Grace privately thinks it is amusing for a thief to mention shame. Grace asks the Marchioness if she knows who she is. Grace looks composed while addressing the brown-haired woman. Grace states that she already knows the answer. Pink-haired Flora claims that people like her can sense status. Flora insists she can distinguish between the noble and lowly. The dialogue continues as Grace maintains her calm demeanor. Grace acknowledges that she understands the pink-haired woman's point. The Marchioness threatens to force Grace to leave herself. She shouts for someone to assist her immediately. A maid rushes into the room to answer her. Marchioness Linko orders all support to Grace's room terminative. Walter rests his hand on a wooden surface. Walter sits at his desk reviewing important documents. He reflects on how much time has already passed. Walter thinks about Grace's beautiful and elegant appearance. He looks toward the door with an intense gaze. Walter admits to himself that he has fallen in love. He decides he must stay firm and not be swayed. Walter smiles subtly while lost in the spots. Walter and Joseph stand together in the large study. Walter orders Joseph to go check on something. Joseph draws his sword to confront a sudden presence. A silver-haired figure is caught hiding in the room. Joseph demands that the intruder identify himself under threat. The silver-haired man mockingly asks what happens if he doesn't. He questions if the knight actually plans to stab him. Dark flowers are shown in the room's foreground. Walter stands to face the mysterious silver-haired man. Joseph is confused as the man's speech sounds familiar. Walter commands Joseph to sheath his sword at once. Walter asks if Grace was the one who called him. The man is surprised that Walter uses her first name. The two men stare at each other with intensity. Grace enters the room and identifies the man as Eric. The group gathers together in the brightly lit room. Grace's ornate, cream-colored dress is shown in detail. Eric greets Grace with a warm and charming smile. Joseph is baffled by Eric's sudden change in personality. Eric takes Grace's hand and kisses it politely. Narrative panels identify Eric Napier as a Viscount in disguise. Eric introduces himself and asks for forgiveness for his rudeness. Walter apologizes for his aide's reaction to the intruder. Eric notes how intensely Joseph had glared at him. Walter asks Eric for a report on the annex. Grace reports that she met Lady Isaac and secured hope. Walter notes the Dowager Duchess will awaken soon. Walter acknowledges the update with quiet contemplation. Eric encourages Grace to rest while she politely acknowledges his instruction. A sudden, low creak sounds as doors open. Walter instructs Joseph to assist the Viscount's discreet departure from the castle. Walter stands alone before a grand window. Memories of his name echo in his mind. The Dowager Duchess weeps over a painful, scorching memory. A sudden, soft gasp sounds from the shadows. He reflects on the weight of stifled sobbing. He ponders of simply breathing. A young Walter witnesses the terrifying heat of a fire. He views himself as a sinner for surviving. Walter formally addresses the Dowager Duchess. He is labeled a sinner who stole a name. To her, he remains an unforgiven survivor. Sunset light fills a quiet, somber bedroom. Walter prepares to face his painful past. He observes that the room remains perfectly unchanged. Time has passed, yet his guilt remains. He looks toward the silent figure in bed. Walter clenches his hand in hidden agitation. A sudden, heavy thud sounds as he sits. Walter asks why she continues to act this way. He notes that time is being wasted. Parasites are currently overtaking the Richmond estate. Walter argues that she should be the one taking action against the vassals. He addresses her as his grandmother. The silent woman remains unmoved by his words. A sudden, loud roar sounds from the flames. He realizes she wants to punish him most. Walter stands amidst the fading embers of guilt. A sudden, quick clink sounds near the mackle. Marchioness Linko stirs her tea while her maid waits. A sudden, light clink sounds from the cup. A sudden, quick tap sounds from footsteps. Flora and the Marchioness stand together, poised. Grace faces them with calm, steady elegance. A sudden, sharp clench sounds from the spoon. A sudden, loud clatter sounds as the Marchioness insults Grace. The Marchioness demands an update on the Red Moon investigation. The maid reports a 3-month delay in results. The Marchioness reacts with intense, visible shock. The maid explains that Grace's lack of surname complicates the search. Eric meets with a hooded informant in secret. A sudden, soft splash sounds as wad pours. Eric suggests that having no surname implies a criminal background. A vision of Grace appears chained in darkness. Marchioness Linko finds the criminal theory very plausible. Fugitives and criminals dwell near the death wall. A sudden, quick tap sounds as the brown-haired Marchioness stirs her tea while her maid waits. Marchioness Linko is visibly shaken by the suggestion that Grace might have committed murder while living in the lawless fugitive village. The narrative implies that Grace's successful seduction of the Duke indicates she is a dangerous woman capable of crimes even worse than killing. A dark warning mentions the existence of those known as the Invisible Ones. The Marchioness plots to eliminate both the foolish Duke and the shameless criminal who has taken the Duchess's place. A malicious smile spreads across the Marchioness's face as she contemplates her next move. She remains certain that Richmond's inner castle is firmly within her control, regardless of Grace's identity. A sudden, light tap sounds as the Marchioness warns Walter and Grace to wait for their inevitable downfall. She vows to make them both crumble miserably, according to the scenario she has meticulously written. The scene shifts to a lavish study where Grace and the silver-haired Eric discuss their business affairs. Blonde-haired Grace reviews the important documents with a look of calm and elegant satisfaction. Eric asks if she is content with the results, and Grace suggests he should demand a reward for producing such impressive profits. Grace acknowledges the success of their venture with a serene smile. Eric looks at the golden-haired woman across the desk with a warm and gentle expression. He admits that his hard work was simply the result of following her specific orders. A flashback reveals a younger, silver-haired Eric crying bitterly before a grave marked with a stone cross. Soft water droplets fall gently upon the white petals of a flower. The young boy walks through the gardens with a younger Grace following closely behind him. He holds the white blossom with small, trembling hands. Young Grace declares that they will seek revenge on the enemy responsible for their family's death. Narrative text describes how Eric's bleak life became vibrant once Grace arrived, like a new sprout. Eric reflects on finding the resolve to stop weeping before his father's final resting place. The young girl watches him with a steadfast and supportive gaze. Present-day Grace looks at her companion with a knowing and affectionate smile. Eric remembers that all his past hardships were ultimately worthwhile because of her. He addresses her with a gaze full of deep and quiet devotion. A vision of a wedding appears as Eric's expression turns sorrowful and longing. He whispers to himself that he is fine, despite his hidden feelings. Eric acknowledges her plan to return to Taylor, but wonders if he can truly accept her becoming someone else's. He questions if he could think it's okay for her to leave his side forever. Grace's voice suddenly pulls Eric back to the present, startling him. Grace questions if a 50% share of the net profit is not enough for him. Eric frantically waves his hands to clarify that he isn't being greedy. A sudden, firm clench sounds as he insists the reward is perfectly sufficient. Grace explains that sharing the profits earned from her capital and his effort is only natural. Eric reaffirms his total devotion to her as her loyal subordinate. Grace smiles at the document, stating that his loyalty is exactly why she chooses to work with him. Eric watches the blonde woman with an intense and unwavering gaze. Grace clarifies that their involvement with Duke Richmond ends once she has reclaimed Taylor. She adds that the Duke will then return to his rightful station. Eric's red eyes reflect a flicker of unspoken sadness. Sunlight glints off the fabric of his dark traveling cloak. A sudden, loud bang sounds as servants rush in to warn that someone is approaching the room. Eric tells Grace to remain cautious as he prepares to make a hasty departure. He reveals that the Marchioness's faction has hired the Red Moon Group to investigate her background. Eric explains they suspect her commoner status and mentions his efforts to buy time by planting rumors about the fugitive village. Grace absorbs the news with a composed and thoughtful expression. The brown-haired maid offers to guide Eric to the exit immediately. A sudden, sharp gasp sounds as the maid realizes Eric is heading toward the balcony. Eric tells Jessie to protect her mistress and disappears over the railing into the night wind. Eric leaps, startled by the height. Joseph watches in shock as Eric leaps. Eric expertly descends from the balcony. Joseph questions Jessie about their mysterious training, and she reveals they received hunter training. Grace sits calmly, pretending to read. Blonde-haired Grace maintains her composed facade. She remains focused on her performance. Two insolent maids enter with a trolley. The brown-haired maid announces that she has brought the meal. Grace ignores them and continues her reading. A sudden, loud clatter sounds as the maid insists on setting up the meal immediately. Jessie fumes at the servants' open disrespect as they enter without knocking. Jessie notes Grace's past hunter training, while Joseph wonders about the nature of such skills. Flashback shows Grace armed with a bell. Grace privately notes the lack of authorized entry into her room. The two maids display their visible frustration. The maid mocks Grace's authority internally while serving. Inner narrative labels Grace a commoner and possibly a dangerous criminal. The maids visualize Grace being rightfully chained. Narrative text details the castle's high standards for hiring. They believe Grace acts superior without any merit. Inner thoughts reveal they only serve due to Flora's bike. Flora previously ordered them to attend to Grace's dinner service out of spite. Pink-haired Flora stands with the conspiring maids. They doubt Grace possesses any true noble character. They list ladylike skills they believe she lacks. Top-down view shows elaborate table setting. Flora watches with a malicious, knowing smile. They mock her ability to use cutlery properly. Flora pays the maids for their continued cooperation. Their testimony is expected to become decisive evidence against Grace. They hope to drive Grace away eventually. The maids leave the room after their service. They find the humiliating situation necessary to survive. Narrative text explains noble dining habits. The maid prepares to reveal the insulting meal. A sudden, loud thud sounds as she mockingly presents a single hunk of meat. They mockingly offer to arrange the silver for her. Grace stares at the insulting meal presented. The table is crowded with unnecessary forks. Grace asks who ordered such a mockery, but the maid dismissively tells her to hurry and eat. The maids stand back with fake smiles. The maid finds Grace's silence very satisfying. They mock Grace for not eating and ask if the meat is too small. They claim eating until full is a habit of the boar. Grace silently prepares to confront the servants. She focuses her gaze on the meat. A sudden sharp thud sounds as Grace strikes. Grace warns them she has given them plenty of chances and demands they clear the table properly. Grace calls out for Jessica's assistance. Jessie barely contains her fury. Grace asks if these are the same maids who guided them earlier, and Jessie confirms they are. Grace orders her to watch those maids discreetly to see where they go and who they meet. Shouts for the crown prince echo through a hellish red void. A man in a dark cloak grips the young boy's shoulders amidst the fire and tells him he must live as Walter from now on. The man tells the shocked boy that this is the only way he can survive. He advises the boy to speak less and hide his true self if pretending to be Walter becomes difficult. The man cups the boy's tear-streaked face as he pleads for something. A desperate plea for His Highness to survive rings out. Young Walter stands amidst flames. The young boy screams in terror as he is consumed by the memory. A sudden, loud scream sounds as the memory of a woman in distress haunts Walter. The woman collapses in pain. A beam of light fades. A sudden, sharp sob sounds as adult Walter gasps during his fit of memory. Walter reflects that while he feels like he cannot breathe, it was others who were actually consumed by the fire. He admits that it was actually those around him who burned. A dark silhouette shrieks in agony amidst the fire. Walter wakes up in his bed, drenched in a cold sweat. Walter sits up after nightmare. Walter catches his breath as visions of white lilies and red curtains blur together. Shadows of the past linger. Grace focuses on the writing. Grace notes that Richmond's power is split between the Linco faction, Marquis Henry for finance, Marchianus Emily for the inner castle, and Count Lewin for the military. Reclaiming Richmond is Zibol. All power must be recovered. Administration is her first target. Grace looks up as Jessie enters the room. Jessie reports that she followed the maids who served dinner yesterday as instructed. Jessie stalks the conspiring maids. One maid hopes the vulgar girl is kicked out soon, while the other finds it unpleasant to share the castle's air, infuriating Jessie. A sudden, sharp scream sounds as the maids discuss Grace's inevitable departure. A sudden muffled groan sounds as Jessie wonders about the source of the noise. A sudden quick thud sounds as Jessie's eyes widen in shock. Grace asks about the assault, and Jessie explains that she heard sounds of beating and screaming coming from inside. Grace reacts with deep concern. Grace moves through the hallway. She knocks on the double doors and calls out for Walter. Grace calls out for Walker. A sudden light click sounds as she opens the door to the darkened study. Sir Joseph asks what she is doing there, and Grace identifies him immediately. Joseph nervously explains that the Duke likely won't show himself for a few days, prompting Grace to ask if something is wrong. Joseph tells her it's simply a habit the Duke has sometimes. Joseph explains that even at the Wall of Death, Walter would disappear for days and act like a completely different person. He notes that Walter simply didn't want to be seen by anyone during those times. Joseph reassures Grace that he will reappear in a few days and tells her not to worry. Grace looks down in bot. Grace quietly accepts the information and walks away. Walter sits alone in shadow. Darkness surrounds the silent Duke. Oppressive dark tendrils loom over the light-haired figure from behind. Dark memories of a noble man and woman are framed by black poppies. Walter sits in his dark bedroom until a sudden, light clink sounds. Walter draws a hidden blade as a sudden, sharp swish sounds. He pins an intruder as a sudden, sharp gasp sounds. Swirling shadows fill the room with a heavy, ominous energy. Candles flicker dimly against the encroaching, silent darkness. Walter collapses in pain as a sudden, painful wheeze sounds. He seizes the cloaked intruder as a sudden, harsh choke sounds. Walter threatens to execute the spy if they are ever caught again.
The terrified spy flees frantically from the Duke's presence.
Walter watches the intruder escape with a hollow, haunted expression. Dark energy pulses on the floor as a sudden, low hum sounds. He questions if there is any difference between himself and a monster. Walter notes that even his own knights speak ill of him. He reflects on his grim reputation as the mad, iron-blooded Duke. He wonders how he can possibly continue to endure his madness. Soul-gnawing fear and internal shadows weigh heavily upon the Duke. A vision of burning rage consumes his thoughts in a fiery blaze. Blonde-haired Grace enters the study and startles the brooding Walter. Grace greets the Duke with a calm and respectful demeanor. Walter stares at her, his expression a mix of surprise and tension. Grace explains that coming to his bedroom was the right choice. Walter remains partially hidden in the shadows of the room. He steps toward her as a sudden, firm thud sounds. Walter asks how she can possibly remain so calm and collected. Grace listens to his desperate question with a steady, thoughtful gaze. She asks if he is truly questioning how she has survived madness. Grace admits that she has envisioned her own dark desires daily. She recalls standing at the altar with her parents' murderer. Visions of the traitors who stole Taylor fill her minds. Grace confesses that she once imagined burning every one of them. She reflects on the immense pain and hatred she carried. She reveals that a single phrase allowed her to endure it all. The simple knowledge that he was alive kept her moving forward. Grace clenches her gown, remembering her long struggle for sanity. She explains how her rage was tempered by his survival. Walter watches her, his gaze softening at her profound honesty. Her words resonate with his own hidden battle against despair. Grace states that she knows Walter is also currently enduring. A vision depicts Walter in armor standing before a flying dragon. She expresses her absolute belief that he will return to fight. Grace vows to be his strength when the time for reclamation comes. They stand together, prepared to face the upcoming struggle for victory. The focus remains on achieving ultimate victory for their house. She acknowledges that he has been her guidepost for many years. Grace stands amidst blooming white roses with a look of resolve. Her green eyes reflect her deep devotion and newfound hope. A vision shows Walter standing on a battlefield with a bloodied pape. Walter reflects that he was only able to survive because of her. Grace tells Walter that he has been her guidepost and anchor for a very long time. Grace continues, explaining she was able to endure because of him as a sudden, sharp thud sounds from her footsteps. Grace looks at the Duke and tells him that he must endure too. Grace explains that her goal is not just to kill her enemies. Grace reflects on the Taylor family crest, symbolizing the cornerstone of the Empire's golden wheat fields. Sunlight bathes the golden fields around the family estate. Grace says she must inherit the great achievements of her ancestors. She continues, stating that he must be a monarch worthy of receiving her loyalty. Grace and Walter stand together, their bond deepening in the quiet room. A sudden, sharp huff sounds as Walter reacts to her bold words. Walter suggests that while Grace speaks politely, her true meaning is that she has endured all this time by trusting him. Walter asks if he is correct about her underlying intentions. Grace responds with a gentle and knowing smile. Walter offers a soft, supportive smile in return. A sudden rhythmic crackle sounds from the logs in the fireplace. Grace and Walter sit across from each other at a chess table, the atmosphere shifting to strategy. Grace explains that the Linko faction appears to be attempting to frame her. Walter listens as she reveals the maids who served dinner yesterday were confined and assaulted within the castle. A sudden, light click sounds as Grace moves a chess piece, suspecting they intend to pin the assault on her as the culprit. Grace looks at Walter and asks if he will be all right despite these schemes. Grace begins to explain her counter-strategy as a sudden, sharp clink sounds. Grace reveals the situation was bait from the start and explains that it would be more troublesome if the enemies didn't bite. A sudden, firm clink sounds followed by a rolling thud as Grace knocks over a pawn with her queen. A sudden, sharp clink sounds as Walter watches her move with intense interest. A series of sudden, rhythmic clinks sound as they play, and Grace is told she can move freely now. Grace beams with a resolved and confident smile. Walter looks upon her with a sense of pride and intrigue. Walter reassures Grace that he will not remain idle while they strike. Walter declares that he will be busy preparing his own moves. The scene shifts to Marchioness Emily and another noblewoman in a lavish room. The other woman praises the Marchioness for her beauty and the necklace she wears. Pink-haired Flora watches as the woman remarks that the necklace has finally found its true owner, but Emily warns her to be careful of who might hear. Flora expresses her enthusiastic agreement with her mother's praise. Emily stands regally, looking every bit like a queen. A sudden joyful giggle sounds as Emily laughs at the flattery. The brown-haired woman praises Emily for raising Flora so well, while Emily credits the woman for cherishing Flora like a daughter. A sudden soft tap sounds as Emily calls for Flora to come and sit beside her. A sudden light tap sounds as Flora sits and confirms her obedience to the Marchioness. Emily looks toward the pink-haired girl with a calculating gaze. Emily gestures towards several jewelry boxes and asks Flora which one in the blue room she likes best. Precious jewels and ornate accessories shimmer within their open boxes. Flora is stunned when Emily suddenly offers to give her one of the jewels. Emily notes that she has always wanted to give Flora a gift while the mother watches with a pleased smile. Narrative text explains the jewels were collected by generations of Richmond duchesses and are symbols of power and prestige. Narrative text explains that Eliza Richmond's retreat to the annex triggered a massive shift in control. Emily reflects on how she seized the keys to the blue room as soon as the former duchess was gone. Emily notes that holding these keys allows her to keep firm leashes on the noblewomen of the inner castle. Flora's mother asks Emily to choose something suitable for Flora, praising her discerning eye. Emily invites them to be enlightened by her excellent and refined taste. Emily presents an elegant pink floral necklace and asks for their opinion. Marchioness Emily declares that she will personally place the exquisite pink floral necklace on Flora. Marchioness Emily explains that the purpose of the gift is to formally establish Flora's presence among the noble women of the inner castle. The brown-haired Marchioness carefully fastens the ornate, glittering jewelry around pink-haired Flora's neck. Flora looks away with a blush, expressing that receiving such a gesture from the Marchioness is a profound honor. Emily offers a brief confirmation with a subtle, self-assured smile. Emily reflects inwardly that this move will make her power clear to everyone, including the Duchess, as she asserts that everything can be chosen according to her own will. Standing amidst blooming flowers, Flora beams with joy and credits the Marchioness for her excellent and refined choice. Flora turns toward two waiting maids and asks for their opinion on the necklace as a sudden light swish sounds. Admiring her reflection, Flora suggests that Grace could never even dream of owning something so precious. Emily asks the maids if they noticed any jewelry in Grace's room, and they nervously stammer that they saw nothing of note as a sudden, shaky thud sounds. A dark vision recalls how Emily had these two girls attend to the dinner in the chandelier room the previous day. Harsh memories resurface of the maids being mocked and questioned for serving such a lowly person as a sudden, heavy wheeze sounds. A menacing threat of death looms over anyone who dares to reveal what happened. The three noblewomen look on as the atmosphere turns somber and a sudden soft sob sounds from the distressed servants. The terrified maids huddle together and plead with the Marchioness for her help. One maid weeps while explaining that someone dragged them away and beat them after dinner, threatening to kill them if they spoke. The other maid confesses that the fear of staying silent has become just as terrifying as the threats. They lean against the Marchioness in desperation as a sudden, quick tap sounds from their movement. Emily draws the two crying girls into a comforting embrace as a sudden, firm thud sounds. She reassures them to speak without worry and promises that she will resolve everything for them. A predatory smile touches Emily's lips as she plots her next move, and a sudden, sharp clink sounds. A fiery, abstract vision shifts the scene to the formal address directed at a royal presence. A hand holds a white masquerade mask against the flames, signaling a forced change in destiny. A young, brown-haired boy gazes at the mask that will soon define his entire existence. Shadows of the court loom over the child as he is told that this is the only way forward. The boy slowly prepares to hide his true face behind the porcelain mask. A haunting question lingers in the darkness regarding his ability to survive the life ahead. Visions of the past depict crowds hailing the young boy as the new Duke of Richmond. The young Duke stands before the grand doors of his future, while the cheers of the court echo around him. Dark thorns frame the boy's face, symbolizing the painful burden of his noble station. The weight of his new title is reinforced by the repeated, thunderous acclaim of the masses. Beads of sweat roll down the boy's face as he hears his name called in a desperate, distant whisper. Young Walter rejects the pressure and attempts to shield himself from the world by putting on the mask. His identity is consumed by chaotic scribbles as he struggles with the forced duality of being the Duke. A void of darkness swallows his thoughts as he begins to lose himself. The ornate white mask tumbles away, falling into a starlit and endless abyss. A vision of adult Walter walking alone through a desolate wasteland reflects his internal search for his own identity. The mask shatters upon the ground into dust as a sudden, sharp clink sounds. A voice commands the Duke to rise as he gazes into a shimmering, distant light. A heartfelt confession acknowledges that he has had a steady anchor and guidepost for a very long time. The presence of another is credited as the only reason he was able to endure his suffering as a sudden, rhythmic thud sounds. Adult Walter appears distressed in his bedchamber, his breath hitching as he awakens from the memories. His eye reflects a flash of lingering pain and the intensity of his internal battle. Walter stares forward with a serious and weary expression as the vision fades. Walter sits on the edge of his bed in a white shirt, wiping his brow in the dim morning light. The Duke remains lost in quiet thought, the tension of his past weighing heavily on him. Sunlight filters through the gaps of an ornate wooden screen, signaling the start of a new day. Through the open doorway, Walter is visible resting his head in his hand after his long ordeal. Joseph enters the study and stops short, reacting with total bewilderment at the Duke's presence. The knight asks why His Grace is there, catching Walter in the middle of reviewing a document. The brown-haired knight stammers in surprise as he explains that he didn't expect the Duke to show himself so soon. Seated at his desk with a document, Walter calmly states that he cannot afford to play around forever. Joseph tilts his head in confusion while a sudden, light tap sounds from Walter's fingers on the desk. Walter notes that the finances are a mess and half the gold bars have been stolen. Walter commands Joseph to prepare 5 remote, dark rooms that are rarely visited by others. Walter gestures to a document and orders Joseph to gather everyone named on that specific list. Joseph is stunned by the Duke's order. Walter confirms a point, and then Joseph asks what the next steps are after the people are gathered. Joseph stands in shock as Walter casually delegates the next phase of the plan entirely to him. Walter exits, leaving Joseph alone as a sudden, firm thud sounds. The knight stands in a state of total bewilderment, struggling to comprehend the task he was just given. A hand reveals a formal document as a sudden, soft swish sounds. Sunlight highlights the important text on the page. Grace walks through a sunlit garden accompanied by a maid while carrying a heavy, leather-bound book. Grace pauses and looks up with interest as her name is called from nearby. A formal voice addresses Grace. Walter approaches with a slight smile, his presence cutting an impressive figure in the bright morning light. Walter inquires if Grace is currently making her way toward the castle's annex. Grace confirms her plan to wait outside until the Dowager Duchess grants her a formal audience. Walter leans in close with a sudden light swish, causing Grace to look at him with surprise. Walter comments that the thickness of the book she carries suggests a very long wait ahead of her. Grace is taken aback by his sudden close proximity and the cryptic nature of his remark. Walter warns her that simply waiting outside will result in her not seeing the Duchess for many years. A sudden, light tap sounds as Walter suggests she would need the entire library to endure such a long wait.
Walter's gaze becomes incredibly intense.
Walter argues that the Duchess wouldn't emerge even if everything outside were to be engulfed in flames. They stand together in the vibrant garden, the tension between them underscored by the serene surroundings. Walter advises Grace that instead of waiting, she must find a way to ignite a fire within the annex itself. Grace questions how she can justify such a disrespectful intrusion into the personal space of the true master of Richmond. A sudden, joyful giggle sounds as Walter dismisses her concerns, noting that the Duchess will certainly be furious once they act. Grace remains motionless, holding her book tightly as she processes his bold suggestion. Grace holds her book tightly as a sudden, firm thud sounds. Walter teases her by asking if her current hesitation is due to having eaten something that didn't agree with her. Walter simply smiles and asserts that this direct and unconventional behavior has always been his true nature. Walter's eye reveals hidden intent. A vision depicts an elegant masquerade mask floating amidst flowers and the name Aries Deccan. A sudden, sharp gasp sounds as Grace looks up, struck by a sudden realization or thought. Walter walks away with a sudden, light swish, instructing Grace to proceed exactly as he suggested. His boots tread across the grass as a sudden, rhythmic thud sounds. Grace stares in wide-eyed shock. Walter pauses and turns his head back, asking if she truly understands the weight of what he said. Walter stands confidently in the light. Grace watches his retreating form from a distance, feeling the gravity of the path he has set before her. Grace gives a small, decisive nod as a sudden, soft tap sounds. A silent understanding passes between them. Walter walks away from the scene. Grace remains in the garden, looking after him with a mixture of apprehension and new determination. Grace looks ahead with determination. Grace reflects on his question, wondering if she truly knows the meaning behind his name. Narrative text explains that Walter found the strength to endure every moment of despair because of her steady presence. Grace reflects on her struggle for survival and her deep-seated need to be worthy of her family name. A sudden, rhythmic tap sounds as the narrative explains that waiting outside for years would never grant her the audience she seeks. A sudden, light tap sounds as Grace resolves to force the Dowager Duchess out of hiding by any means necessary. A maid attempts to block Grace's path in the hallway, loudly demanding to know where she thinks she is going, as a sudden, sharp tap sounds. The maid's frantic warning that this is the Dowager's private quarters is punctuated by a sudden, loud bang from Grace's intrusion. Grace stands determined, realizing she must be the one to ignite the metaphorical fire within the Duchess's sanctuary. Entering the dim bedchamber, Grace formally requests forgiveness for her bold and uninvited appearance. The Dowager Duchess, lying in her bed, sharply critiques Grace for her audacity in standing before her as if she has done nothing wrong. A sudden heavy creak sounds as the maid gasps in shock at Grace's refusal to be intimidated by the elder noblewoman. The Dowager Duchess stares at Grace with a cold and piercing gaze. Grace observes that even in her seclusion, the Dowager possesses a dignity that puts the pretenders in the castle to shame. The white-haired Dowager Duchess maintains a stern and unyielding expression. Grace expresses her regret for the intrusion while asserting that this confrontation was an eventual necessity. Grace challenges the Dowager's seclusion, asking if an obedient wait would have ever resulted in a meeting. Grace questions if the Dowager felt any curiosity regarding the reason for her persistent requests for an audience. The Dowager dismisses any curiosity, expressing only shock at the lack of restraint shown by an unmarried noble lady. The Dowager Duchess coldly questions if Grace has any regard for her own family's honor. Grace prepares to respond with a calm and measured tone. Grace reveals the grim alternative of her past, explaining she would have been wed to the family responsible for her parents' deaths. Grace notes that a quiet and obedient life would have yielded a far worse fate. Grace asks if her family's honor would truly be preserved by submitting to the very people who destroyed it. The Dowager Duchess listens in silence, her expression unreadable as Grace challenges her worldview. A haunting question arises regarding the true purpose of the Dowager's long-term isolation. Grace asks if the Duchess's retreat is truly for Richmond's honor, prompting Jessie to warn her to watch her tongue. Grace asks why the Dowager is abandoning the estate and waiting for death as a sudden, sharp gasp sounds. The Dowager Duchess remains seated on her bed, her posture reflecting a heavy and ancient sorrow. Silence fills the room as the Duchess processes Grace's blunt and piercing questions. A sudden light creak sounds as the Dowager Duchess prepares to break her silence. A sudden sharp sizzle sounds as the Duchess lights a cigarette, the smoke curling into the dim air. The Dowager Duchess states she has no interest in Grace's goals, but agrees to answer her question. The Duchess prepares to divulge a personal truth. She holds the burning cigarette, the embers glowing in the twilight of the room. The Duchess recalls a tragic carriage accident, noting that the something she once fought for died a long time ago. A flash of lingering pain is visible in the Duchess's weary eye. The Duchess commands Grace to stop her inquiries and leave the chamber immediately. She sighs, stating her only desire is to return to a sleep so deep it resembles death. A sudden, heavy thud sounds as the massive doors are shut, signaling the end of the audience. Grace remains lost in thought after her intense encounter with the Dowager. The grand chandelier hangs silently over the empty hall. Later that day, Grace sits at her desk, meticulously penning a new plan. Grace reflects that her initial attempt to stir the Duchess was insufficient, and that a much larger catalyst is required. She contemplates the nature of the fire she must now set to achieve her goals. Grace grips her quill tightly as her resolve hardens. Grace's attention is caught by a sudden, quick shout of her title as Jessie rushes into the room. Jessie breathlessly reports that Linko's maids are moving toward the chandelier room with suspicious intent. Grace realizes that her enemies are planning to shift the blame for their own violent actions onto her. Flora and Emily plot their next move, deciding to tell Walter to stay back so he doesn't interfere in internal matters. A sudden, rhythmic thud sounds from the hallway, catching Grace and Jessie by surprise. Grace quickly instructs Jessie to depart and execute her part of the plan. Flora and her mother stand confidently, surrounded by flowers, as they prepare to initiate their trap. A close-up of dark eyes reflects a cold, calculating gaze. Grace sits in an ornate hall, poised as she holds a delicate teacup. Grace remains calm and silent, her expression unreadable. A hand sets down a cup as a formal voice demands her attention. Marchioness Linko appears, coldly informing Grace she has been summoned and must come at once. A group of noblewomen stand gathered, their faces hidden in shadow. Decorative text marks the transition to the Chamber of Punishment. Narrative text explains that Marchioness Linko presides as the judge over the secret tribunal. The Grand Hall is revealed as the dreaded Chamber of Punishment. Text details how this place was used to hold noblewomen accountable for their alleged crimes. The text confirms that the most frequent user of this chamber is Marchioness Linto. Noblewomen express shock that such heinous acts could occur within the walls of Richmond Castle. They gossiped about how Grace allegedly laid hands on the maids and beat them. Linko and Flora look on as the maids appear visibly terrified of Grace. Linko sneers at Grace, calling her a shameless woman for her supposed actions. A sudden, loud thud sounds as someone declares Grace guilty, the word surrounded by heavy chains. Grace stands alone and composed amidst a flurry of white lilies. The noblewomen glare at Grace with intense hostility and judgment. A sudden, sharp swish sounds as Grace takes her seat, noting it seems to be her designated spot. Grace looks around the imposing hall with a steady, unimpressed gaze. Noblewomen whisper in the background as Grace remains silent and observant. Grace asks why she was summoned, only for a brown-haired woman to scream that she has no permission to speak. Linko stares with piercing eyes, insulting Grace's lack of proper noble etiquette. A sudden, quick tap sounds as the women mock Grace for her lack of a chaperone or parents to guide her behavior. Linko calls for order as the guests question Grace's lowly status and social standing. Linko addresses Grace with a cold and dismissive tone. Linko asks Grace if she recognizes the two maids standing before the court. Grace confirms that they are the ones who prepared her dinner service. Flora watches as Linko notes these maids were personally sent to assist Grace as a kindness. Linko asks how Grace could possibly justify repaying such kindness with violence. Grace denies any wrongdoing, prompting a noblewoman to accuse her of playing deceptive word games. Linko shouts that Grace laid hands on her daughter's innocent maids. The maids tearfully recount being dragged to a dark room and beaten repeatedly while begging for mercy. A vision depicts the maids being assaulted for their supposed failures during the dinner service. Linko's mouth curls into a smirk as she calls Grace nothing more than the Duke's lover. Red flowers bloom as the court demands Grace accept her punishment for such barbaric acts. The maids weep, claiming Grace threatened to kill them if they ever spoke of the assault. The noblewomen whisper that Grace's lowly status makes such behavior inevitable and chant that she is guilty. Grace calmly asserts that she has never committed such heinous acts. A sudden, sharp thud sounds as Flora stands up, furiously asking if Grace is calling her maids liars.
Grace asks the maids if they are absolutely certain they saw her during the incident.
The maids hesitate before claiming they distinctly heard Grace's voice speaking to them. Grace points out that voices can be mimicked and that anyone close to Flora would know the dinner details. Dark lilies frame Grace's inner monologue as she explains the accusations are based only on circumstantial evidence. Grace argues that as a new arrival who might get lost in the castle, she has no reason or means to commit such a crime. Linko is secretly impressed by Grace's ability to maintain her composure under such intense pressure. A sudden, quick tap sounds as Linko closes her fan and prepares to deliver her judgment. Linko claims to be acting as an impartial observer tasked with upholding order in the inner court. Linko declares herself the master of the board, confident that her plan is foolproof. Linko asserts that Grace's alleged crimes are serious and will not be taken lightly by the castle's law. Sitting poised, the tribunal head notes that conflicting claims prevent a hasty judgment. With cold eyes, Marchioness Linko orders all 3 women escorted to the dungeon. The maids gasp as the tribunal leader declares further investigation will happen in the depths. Grace swallows hard, fully aware of the dungeon's notorious and terrifying reputation. In silent darkness, the dungeon's isolation breaks a prisoner's mind to pieces. Grace is suddenly seized by the hostile noblewomen surrounding her. Linko barks for Grace to stand and face her immediate imprisonment. Flora watches with a triumphant and malicious smirk. A sudden, heavy crash sounds as Grace is roughly handled amidst the lilies. Walter suddenly bursts through the chamber doors, halting the proceedings. Grace stares wide-eyed at Walter's unexpected and timely arrival. Walter's face is set in a mask of cold, unyielding fury. A sudden, sharp tapping sounds as Walter holds several official-looking documents. The reddish-brown-haired guard informs the Duke that the finance chiefs have been dismissed. The guard commands Walter for interrogating 5 men in under an hour. Walter critiques the poorly forged financial records, mocking the nervous stuttering of the corrupt officials. Walter orders the guard to secure the signed statements and evidence carefully. Jesse rushes in, breathlessly reporting that Linko's maids have seized Grace. Walter's eye narrows in anger as he learns Grace was taken to punishment. Walter's expression hardens with a lethal and focused intensity. Walter's voice booms through the room, commanding everyone to release Grace. Linko gasps in shock at Walter's sudden and forceful interference. Flora is frozen in disbelief as her plan is interrupted. The noblewomen offer a tense and formal greeting as Walter approaches. Walter calls out Marchioness Emily Linko by name with icy precision. Walter coldly demands an explanation for the chaos occurring in his absence. Linko claims she was merely following local custom to maintain order in the court. Walter scoffs at the term, questioning since when Empress Isabella's methods became castle custom. Walter asks if the Dowager Duchess authorized the use of such brutal methods within Richmond. Linko defends herself, claiming these methods are simply the most effective way to settle disputes. Linko recounts the accusations of assault and threats leveled against Grace by the maids. Walter turns to the maids, asking exactly when the alleged assault took place. Linko tries to dismiss him, but Walter insists on hearing the timing of the incident. The 2 maids hesitate, exchanging a nervous and uncertain glance. The maids claim the attack happened last night, prompting Walter to ask for the location. The maids vaguely describe the location as somewhere near the main castle's first floor. They testified that the room they were taken to was pitch black and windowless. Walter repeats their claim of being held in total darkness within his own castle. Walter orders the security chief summoned, causing Linko to cry out in surprise. Walter holds Count Lewin accountable, ignoring Linko's protests about blowing the matter out of proportion. Walter firmly asserts that the scope of the investigation is his decision alone. Walter stares down Linko with an air of absolute authority. Linko remains silent, her back to the room as she processes her defeat. Walter tells the maids to rest, promising they will be questioned again for the truth. Grace watches Walter with a mixture of relief and quiet gratitude. Walter extends his hand toward Grace in a protective and gentle gesture. Walter looks at Grace with a soft yet serious expression. Walter offers his open palm to the blonde noblewoman. Grace reaches out and gently places her hand in Walter's. Grace allows Walter to lead her away from the site of the confrontation. Marchioness Linko stands alone in the grand hall, looking poised and regal. A sudden, sharp creak sounds as the blonde noblewoman looks back over her shoulder. A cold and satisfied smile plays on the brown-haired woman's lips as she watches the pair leave. Grace watches with a wary and focused eye as she processes the recent confrontation. A sudden, heavy thud echoes through the hallway, signaling the end of the tribunal. Grace remains silent and observant as she walks away from the site of her interrogation. Grace's inner thoughts suggest that the Marchioness's smile indicates a plan that has not yet finished unfolding. Narrative text explains that the Linko's ultimate goal is to remove the Duke from his position of power. The text reveals that the entire assault accusation was staged, using Grace as a mere pretext to strike at the Duke. Grace realizes the plan was riddled with holes, as the Duke's intervention was enough to settle the matter quickly. Grace muses that even without his help, she would have refused to confess to the false charges. Grace looks at her companion with a mixture of curiosity and quiet contemplation.
The black-haired man suggests that she should relax her cold and rigid expression now that they are alone.
As they walk, Grace notes that many curious eyes are watching their interaction from the shadows. Walter walks in silence, his profile set in a serious and unreadable mask. Grace concludes that for the sake of their shared goals, she must play the part of the Duke's beloved lover. A soft, rustling sound follows as Grace reaches out to close the distance between them. Grace gently takes Walter's arm, presenting a united front to those observing them in the palace. Walter begins to speak, his voice low and steady as he addresses Grace. Walter recounts bringing his knights back from battle and the vital lesson he repeatedly told them. A light, quick thud sounds as they stop, and Walter urges her to never value her own life so cheaply.
Walter recalls her earlier promise to serve as his most loyal and sharpest weapon in his cause.
Walter insists that she must never see herself as disposable bait intended to simply disappear. Grace reminds him that she has not forgotten her own resolute promise to reclaim what she lost. Grace asserts that her commitment to her goal remains as strong as ever despite the recent chaos. Walter admits that he has heard such fiercely determined words from her in the past. A sudden, dull ache twinges in Walter's heart as he looks down at her hand on his arm. A soft, quick tap sounds as Grace pivots the conversation to ask about the current state of the Dowager Duchess. Grace explains that two specific catalysts are required to finally rouse the elder woman from her stupor. Grace details that both a driving purpose and a spark of long-lost emotion are necessary for her awakening. Grace's green eyes narrow with focus as she considers the weight of their next strategic move. Grace asks why he stopped walking, prompting Walter to explain that she is the only person who can succeed. Walter believes that Grace is the one capable of kindling a fire strong enough to reach the Dowager Duchess. Grace asks for a clearer explanation, and Walter clarifies that they must incite a metaphorical fire within the Duchess. Walter posits that definitive and overwhelming anger is the only force powerful enough to wake his mother. Walter asserts that Grace is the key to creating that anger, citing the history of the imperial bloodline. Decorative text describes how past emperors were known for their decisiveness and incredibly high standards. The imperial family is noted for their legendary impatience and their willingness to openly express their fury. The narrative suggests that a true descendant of that bloodline must now become the fire that wakes the Duchess. Walter observes that the Dowager Duchess seems to be passively waiting for death to claim her. Grace maintains a different perspective, believing that the elder woman is actually waiting specifically for her. Walter touches his hair with a sigh, expressing deep doubt that he has the power to lift his mother's spirits. Walter looks down with a pained and heavy expression, burdened by the history of their relationship. Walter reflects on a decade of letters and visits that have all been met with cold silence. A vision depicts Walter standing in the Dowager's room as she refused to acknowledge his presence. Walter feels that he lacks the personal significance required to reach her heart after all these years. A vision of a burning carriage appears as Walter labels himself a sinner who survived a tragic loss. Walter fears that attempting to see her again will backfire, while Grace questions what he means by that term. Grace notes that the Duchess might shut the door completely, prompting Walter to dismiss the idea. Grace points out that for the Duchess to lock a door against them, she would first have to get up and act. Walter explains that the Dowager Duchess returning to activity is the only thing that matters, since she currently refuses to speak to anyone, while a sudden, quick knock sounds as someone calls out for him. The reddish-brown-haired guard informs the Duke that he has received the documents regarding the military forces inside the castle from the security chief. A soft, heavy exhale sounds as Walter decides he should go, prompting Grace to address him. Grace stands calmly among white lilies. Walter's expression remains cold and focused. Grace watches as the men depart. A sudden, loud slam sounds as the blonde man curses the Duke for summoning 5 people at once over a single financial summary document. 5 officials attempt to shift blame over a single inconsistent document. The official plots to blame the most useless person while worrying about the military investigation. The official sweats under intense pressure. Marcianus Linko appears among red dresses. Linko notes the room's messy state. Linko offers a playful smile while asking if she should call the maids to clean the room. The official acknowledges her arrival wearily. The official's mouth tightens as he questions if their plan is truly the right one. A sudden, sharp sweep sounds as the man panics about the Duke investigating their military forces. A rhythmic, steady tap-tap sounds as Linko mentions hearing that he couldn't even manage to imprison the woman who is the Duke's lover. The official fears Walter seizing complete control over finances and military forces. Linko offers a reassuring hand. Linko confidently asserts that everything happening now is just laying the groundwork for their ultimate goal. The man expresses his lingering doubts. Linko smiles coldly while stating that whatever the Duke chooses to do will not affect the plan they have laid out. They walk away into the shadows. Paperwork matters less than actual influence. The text clarifies that they do not rely on mere scraps of paper because they have people they can move. Their influence spans all of Richmond. A cold eye watches from darkness. Maids stand among red spider lilies. They view everyone as chess pieces. A soft tap sounds as a letter falls. Grace stands in the bright garden. Grace looks ahead with soft curiosity. Walter waits for her near columns. Walter simply says it is time. Walter reminds her not to get her hopes up, repeating what he told her the previous day. Grace offers a gentle, radiant smile. They walk toward the sunlit archway. The Dowager Duchess sits in isolation. Distant, frantic shouts warn the Duke that he must not do this. Walter enters the Duchess's silent room. He stands before his silent mother. The elderly woman stares coldly ahead. The Duchess commands the boy to survive and grow stronger by any means, noting he lived at the cost of her family. She commands him to ascend to the imperial throne for all to see. Her cold gaze remains fixed. A rhythmic thudding sounds in the snow. The Duchess watches his departure. A sharp, tight snap sounds as the boy vows that he will definitely return alive without fail. The boy rides with fierce determination. He vows to restore Richmond's name. The Dowager Duchess sits in a vast, sun-drenched room, looking small and fragile in her bed. Her face is weary and etched with age as she looks out toward the light. Distant voices echo through the hall, pleading with the Duke to reconsider his actions. Walter stands tall and imposing before his mother, his expression grave and unyielding. The Duchess stares back at him with a gaze that is both sharp and filled with a cold, quiet anger. A brown-haired woman, a maid, looks on in shock as a sudden, sharp sound punctuates the tension. The Duchess's voice cuts through the air, demanding to know the meaning of the Duke's intrusion. Her words are sharp and final, commanding him to leave her presence immediately. A close-up captures only a fraction of her face, highlighting the cold intensity of her stare. Walter remains unmoved, his arms crossed as he looks down at her with a mixture of challenge and resolve. He points out the discourtesy of her current state, reminding her that he told her to wait and not to die. From a distance, they sit together on her bed, a small pocket of tension in the grand, silent room. Walter's voice is harsh as he describes her as a living corpse in a tomb, barely clinging to a life she doesn't seem to recognize. He accuses her of bringing an unmarried woman into the castle only to let her throw the entire place into chaos. His words suggest that the only remaining choice is to overturn everything and expose the hidden rot within their family. The Duchess listens with a look of weary disdain, arguing that such actions should be done with dignity rather than sordid behavior. Walter counters that keeping a lid on the filth only turns their entire world into a cesspit. He asks if she truly wishes to reign as the queen of that very cesspit, prompting an outraged outburst from her. Walter simply notes that her cheeky tongue is a family trait, his expression remaining coolly detached. A tray of warm soup is brought in, a small and grounding gesture of care amidst their verbal sparring. Walter admits that despite his words, he is truly glad to see her so lively once again. He explains that he worried her strength had faded so much that he would have to feed her himself. The Duchess sits alone once more, her back to the camera as she gazes at the simple meal. Her voice rings out with renewed command, ordering Arwen to see the Duke out immediately. Walter turns to leave, his expression calm as he assures her he will not go far. The maid, Arwen, watches the Duke's departure with a look of concern and quiet observation. Grace steps forward, her voice soft as she addresses the Dowager Duchess directly. The Duchess looks up, her gaze meeting the young blonde woman's for the first time. Grace offers a gentle and sincere greeting, expressing her happiness at seeing the Duchess awake and sitting up. Grace mentions Walter's deep worry, highlighting the hidden concern beneath his earlier harsh words. She requests permission to offer a proper greeting, despite the lateness and the tension in the room. Grace performs a graceful and respectful curtsy, her white dress billowing around her in the sunlight. She formally introduces herself as Grace of House Duke Taylor, her voice clear and unwavering. The Dowager Duchess watches her with a mixture of curiosity and a dawning sense of recognition. A vision depicts a regal woman and a kneeling man, perhaps a memory or a symbolic representation of the duty they all share. Grace remains in her curtsy, her presence filling the room with a sense of calm and resolute determination. The Duchess remains silent, her thoughts hidden behind her weary but focused eyes. Walter walks alone through the castle corridors, his profile set in a thoughtful and unreadable mask. A guard interrupts his thoughts with an urgent report about the maid's suicides and a left-behind note. The news reveals a plan to implicate Grace and drag her to the underground dungeon using the assault accusation. The Duchess sits in the background, a silent witness to the new chaos unfolding just beyond her doors. Grace processes the news with a wary and focused eye, her green eyes narrowing as she considers her next move. Walter and Grace stand together in the grand hallway, their profiles silhouetted against the light from the large windows. Walter warns her about the horrors of the underground dungeon, where most people lose their sanity within days. He looks down at her with a serious and questioning gaze, asking if she truly believes she can endure what is coming. Grace's voice is firm and resolute as she accepts the challenge, even offering him the right to abandon her if she fails. Walter's expression remains unreadable as he absorbs her unwavering commitment to their shared goal. Grace's eyes shine with determination as she asserts that such a failure will not happen. She vows to survive to the end and return to House Taylor, her ultimate goal guiding her every word. As the castle doors slam shut, Walter's voice echoes in the hallway, commanding Grace Taylor to endure. Walter firmly confirms his agreement. Grace looks ahead with fierce determination, silently vowing to survive everything and reclaim the honor of House Taylor.